I was being brought to set in a wheelchair. Like, I couldn't walk that far.
After the reunion, Christina Applegate completely exposes Ed O'Neill. There are stories that Hollywood keeps buried for decades. Stories that live in the spaces between takes, in the quiet conversations that happen after the cameras stop rolling, in the bonds that form when nobody is watching. And then, sometimes, someone decides it is time to stop being quiet. Christina Applegate has spent most of her adult life being gracious about her time on Married with Children. She has been diplomatic. She has been measured. But after a recent reunion brought the old cast back into each other's orbit, something shifted. Something loosened. And what came out of that shift has given fans of the show a completely different understanding of who Ed O'Neill really is and what truly happened during 11 seasons of one of the most controversial sitcoms in television history. This is not a story of scandal in the way you might expect. It is not a story of conflict or betrayal or hidden resentment. It is something far more complicated and far more human than any of that. It is the story of a 15-year-old girl who walked onto a soundstage in 1987 and encountered a man who would quietly become one of the most important people in her life. And it is the story of what Christina Applegate has finally decided the world deserves to know about him. When Married with Children premiered on Fox in April of 1987, nobody quite knew what to make of it. The network itself was barely a year old. The show was raw, deliberately offensive by the standards of the era, and built around a premise that inverted everything that American sitcom families were supposed to represent. The Bundys were not the Huxtables. They were not the Keatons. They were loud and crude and selfish and completely, gloriously dysfunctional. And right at the center of that carefully constructed chaos was a young girl named Christina Applegate, playing Kelly Bundy, the beautiful and famously dim-witted teenage daughter of a miserable shoe salesman. Christina was 15 when she filmed the pilot. She had been working as a child actress since she was very young, having appeared in small roles and commercials. But nothing had prepared her for the scale of what Married with Children would become. She was stepping into a character who was written as a teenage sex symbol, and she was doing it at an age when most girls are still figuring out who they are. The wardrobe was revealing. The jokes about Kelly were frequently centered on her appearance and her lack of intelligence. The attention the show generated, and the attention that would inevitably fall on Christina personally, was unlike anything a teenager should have to navigate alone. Ed O'Neill was 41 years old when the show began. He had come from a background in theater and had done his time in small film and television roles before landing the part of Al Bundy. He was not a Hollywood insider in the traditional sense. He had not grown up in the industry. He understood it from the outside looking in, and that perspective gave him a clarity about its dangers that many performers who had been raised in it simply did not have. When he looked at Christina Applegate on that set, he did not see a prop or a co-star. He saw a kid who needed someone paying attention. What Christina has revealed in various interviews and candid conversations over the years, and what has come into sharper focus since the cast began reconnecting publicly, is that Ed O'Neill made a private decision very early in the show's run. He was going to look out for her, not in any formal or announced way, not in a way that anyone would have held a press conference about, just quietly, consistently, and with the kind of steadiness that a teenager in a chaotic industry desperately needs and rarely finds. He positioned himself as a buffer between Christina and the more adult dimensions of the production. When conversations on set drifted into territory that was inappropriate for a 15 or 16-year-old, Ed redirected them. When someone on the crew or in the guest cast crossed a line with her, even subtly, Ed made his presence known in a way that communicated without words that it was not going to continue. The dynamic was not one that Ed ever spoke about publicly, and for a long time Christina didn't either. There's something private about gratitude at that depth. When someone protects you in ways that are so fundamental to your well-being that you can barely articulate them, putting those things into words can feel like it diminishes them somehow. But as Christina has gotten older, and particularly as she has faced circumstances that have required her to think hard about who has genuinely been present in her life, she has started to talk about it. And what she says strips away any remaining illusion that Married with Children was just a job for the people who made it. She has described moments that the audience never saw and that rarely made it into any behind-the-scenes coverage. Ed driving her home after late shoots because he did not want her traveling alone at night through Los Angeles. Ed calling her mother not because anything was wrong, but because he understood that a parent with a teenage daughter working on a show like this one deserved reassurance that someone was watching over her. Ed standing between Christina and producers when they pushed for content or situations that made her uncomfortable. Doing it calmly and without creating a scene, but doing it firmly enough that it never became an ongoing conversation. These were not required actions. Nobody in a contract or a union agreement asked Ed O'Neill to do any of this. He did it because he chose to. They stayed in contact in the years that followed. He watched her career from a distance that was never very far. When she appeared in films, when she launched new television projects, when she won awards for work that had nothing to do with Kelly Bundy, Ed was watching and he was proud. He gave advice when she asked for it. He gave support even when she did not ask, which is the more demanding and meaningful version. The relationship that had formed under the conditions of a television production turned out to be real enough to survive the production's end, and then to survive for decades afterward. Christina's career after Married with Children demonstrated something important about the foundation that had been built during those 11 years. She was not a performer who had been trapped by a single iconic role. She moved fluidly between comedy and drama. She earned critical recognition for work that was sophisticated and emotionally complex. She proved that Kelly Bundy had been a character she played, not the limit of what she could do. And when people asked her about that trajectory, about how she managed to build a serious career after being so closely associated with a broad comedy character, she has often pointed back to the discipline and the craft that she developed during those years on set, and to the people who took her development seriously when she was young enough that they could have easily dismissed her. Then came August 2021. Christina Applegate posted on social media to announce that she had been diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. The news hit her fanbase and the entertainment community with the weight of something genuinely shocking, even though illness is never entirely shocking because it can happen to anyone. There's something about the specific image of this particular woman, so associated in the public imagination with vitality and physical confidence, announcing that she was dealing with a disease that attacks the central nervous system and progressively alters the body's ability to function, that made the announcement land with unusual force. The diagnosis had actually been made some months earlier, while she was still filming the final season of Dead to Me for Netflix, but she had waited to share it publicly until she was ready to do so on her own terms. Multiple sclerosis is a disease that does not follow a predictable path. It affects the central nervous system, disrupting the signals between the brain and the body, and its progression and symptoms vary significantly from person to person. For Christina, it has meant learning to use a cane to walk. It has meant dealing with cognitive fog and fatigue that are invisible to outside observers, but that fundamentally alter the experience of daily life. It has meant grieving a version of herself and a future she had imagined that the disease has made impossible. She has been honest about all of this in a way that is not performed bravery, but rather the genuine article, the kind of honesty that comes from a person who has decided that pretending is simply too exhausting. When Christina has talked about the responses she received from people in her life after the diagnosis became public, she consistently returns to the response from her Married with Children family. Ed O'Neill's outreach was not a brief acknowledgement. It was not a public post designed to be seen. It was a kind of direct, private, sustained presence that he had been providing since she was 15 years old. He made sure she knew that his care for her was not contingent on her health or her career or her ability to show up on a set. The same commitment he had made quietly in 1987 was still in place in 2021 because it had never actually been about the show. The entire former cast rallied. Katie Sagal, who had played Peggy Bundy and who had her own experience with profound loss and recovery, was vocal and present. David Faustino, the kid who had grown up alongside Christina on that set and who she genuinely thought of as a brother, made clear that the bond they shared was not going anywhere. The community that had formed around the production of a comedy show about a terrible shoe salesman and his deeply dysfunctional family turned out to be one of the more durable and genuine communities that Hollywood had accidentally created. In November of 2022, Christina received a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. She arrived with a cane. Her movements were different than they had been, slower and more deliberate, and anyone who had watched her perform for 3 decades could see the difference. She was also completely, entirely present. She spoke at the ceremony about her diagnosis and about what it had meant to face it with people who loved her. She spoke about her early career and about the people who had shaped her. The speech was emotional and funny and entirely Christina, which is to say it was more honest than it needed to be and more witty than most people could manage under those circumstances. 2 months later, in January 2023, she appeared at the Emmy Awards. The moment she walked onto the stage with her cane, the audience stood. Not in a polite, following the leader way, but in an immediate and unanimous way that suggested the people in that room had all been waiting for the opportunity to say something they did not have words for. The standing ovation lasted close to a full minute. Christina stood there and absorbed it, visibly moved, and then did the thing she has always done, which is find the humor in the middle of the overwhelming emotion. Her comment about the audience shaking her brain made everyone laugh through whatever they were feeling. It was, in miniature, a demonstration of exactly how she has approached the hardest parts of her life. What has come out of the cast's recent reunions, virtual and in person, are the stories that never made it into any coverage of the show during its original run. The running jokes and their origins. The improvised moments that became beloved recurring bits. The relationships that developed between the performers and the crew. The atmosphere on set that Ed O'Neill largely set by example. One in which the work was taken seriously and the people doing it were treated with respect, even when the content of the show itself was deliberately pushing against every available limit. Christina has talked about the specific texture of working alongside Ed. About how he used improvisation not just to generate comedy, but as a teaching method. He would change his delivery mid-scene to see how she would respond, not to trip her up, but to build her reflexes, to develop in her the capacity to be genuinely present rather than just technically hitting her marks. Those lessons shaped her as a performer in ways that went far beyond Married with Children, and she has been clear about acknowledging it. About how he used improvisation not just to generate comedy, but as a teaching method. He would change his delivery mid-scene to see how she would respond, not to trip her up, but to build her reflexes, to develop in her the capacity to be genuinely present rather than just technically hitting her marks. Those lessons shaped her as a performer in ways that went far beyond Married with Children, and she has been clear about acknowledging it.